A New York Times Siena poll shows President Biden is trailing former President Trump in 5 critical battleground states. Now, that's getting a lot of attention, but remember, it is still very early in the race, and many of these results are within the margin of error. Just think about this. Today, Trump was in a New York courtroom for his civil fraud trial. He's also charged with 91 felony counts in 4 different jurisdictions. Meanwhile, President Biden was in Delaware today talking to workers about a $16 billion federal investment in rail travel. Back with us to discuss 2 of my favorites, Robert Gibbs, former Obama campaign senior advisor and White House press secretary under President Obama, and Mark McKinnon is here, former advisor to both George W. Bush and John McCain. He's one of the co-hosts of The Circus on Showtime. Mr. Gibbs, I turn to you first because it was this time in 2011 when the headlines on your screen right now were out there, headlines predicting Obama was going to lose in 2012. It didn't look good. He ended up winning 332 electoral votes in that election. So what is your takeaway from this new polling that has some people scared?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I think these are warning signs for the Biden campaign. I think everybody should be clear about that. And I don't think any of these numbers surprised anybody inside of the Biden campaign. But you pointed out polls a year out aren't predictions about what's going to happen in a year. They're a kind of a tally of how people feel when the poll is taken. So, look, there's a whole campaign that's going to be played out. It's going to be played out in the 6 states that you're showing there. And it's going to be really incumbent upon the Biden campaign to make this a real choice in the election, right? He's going to have to go out there and sell the economic message that he tried to sell today with a stark contrast about where and how Donald Trump is going to approach this economy for working class and middle class Americans. And if they put that choice in front of people, there's certainly a path to win this race. If they don't put that choice in front of people, or they wait too long to do that, there's a lot of peril in that strategy.
Mark, what do you think? Because President Biden is out there all the time talking about investing in America, and a ton of good things have happened.
That's what's problematic, is that's not breaking through. When you look at sort of the macro picture here, what's really disturbing is that Joe Biden, when there's arguably been a lot of good news for him on the economy, on managing international conflicts in 2 huge emergency hotspots of crisis in Ukraine and Israel, you'd say he's done a pretty good job. During that, his polling numbers have gone down, not just with Republicans, but with his own party. At the same time, when Trump is facing 91 counts, 4 indictments, his poll numbers have strengthened, not just despite and in some ways because of what he's going through. Now, I think the encouraging thing out of this polling news is not much, but the one thing I would say is that when people confront the potential actuality, and there is going to be a trial in March. Clearly, Judge Chutkan is determined to maintain it. So it's going to happen before the election. And if that trial happens and he is found guilty, that same polling shows that those numbers flip over to Biden pretty dramatic. And so people, they say, they say he's going through this legal stuff. But if he's actually convicted of a crime, things are going to change and maybe change pretty dramatically. Finally, I'll just say my colleague, John Heilemann on the Circus says, it makes a good point, which is, I think in the abstract, a lot of Democrats are like, it can't be Trump. It's really not, or they just haven't really sat down and faced this reality. And when they do, they'll sober up and that those numbers will balance out a bit.
OK, but the example you just gave about the Chutkan trial in March, does this polling show how important it is for that trial to be televised? Because look what's happening with the fraud case in New York. Trump's just going outside of the courthouse steps and lying every chance he gets.
100%. But I think what we lose sight of is at the end of the day on all this legal stuff, it's not going to be the court of public opinion. It's going to be 12 people that are in the court and they see the evidence and they're going to try the evidence. And we know, I mean, you know a lot more about this than I do, I'm sure. But, in trials, even though people may be sympathetic to an individual, they really look at the facts. And at the end of the day, the facts are going to determine his future.
Let's think about this, though, Robert. This election really does look like it could be a choice between free and fair elections in 2028 or Donald Trump trying to stay in power indefinitely. How can Democrats communicate the seriousness, right, of the fragility of our democracy to the American people? It's just not something people thinking about when they're getting gas or going to the grocery store.
Well, I think two things, and Mark touched on one of them, and that is, again, you've got to put this choice more clearly in front of people. It is very easy to tell a pollster a year out that you feel agnostic about this choice, or you don't feel great about or enthusiastic about something. I think as people get this choice put in front of them a month, 3 weeks, 2 weeks before an election, that's different. But I also think it's important what you just talked about, and that is, it is important to talk about the economy first, right? He's got to have an economic message that breaks through. The disconcerting numbers that show Trump's more trusted on the economy than Biden should be alarming. Look, to be very blunt about this, I think the president needs to stop talking about the fact that America is back. I think he needs to talk about the fact we have a plan to bring America back. We are trying to improve your lives. But the truth is, people, you can't talk your way into having people feel better about the economy. I think this idea of looking at this through economic statistics and saying that the economy is recovered is a danger for people whose lives don't feel different. Even though inflation is down over 9 months, it still costs a lot more money to borrow money for a car. It still costs a lot more money to pay your mortgage. And I think you've got to live where people live. And only then are you going to have the permission structure, I think, to talk really about democracy in a way that's important.
It's just hard to explain to people, listen, guys, all the economists predicted we would be in a recession right now. We're not. So you should be happy about that. Like, that's he would be right in making that argument, but it's difficult to convince people of that.
Stephanie, we were faced with this very same challenge when Joe Biden was vice president, 2009 and 2010, and then segueing into 2011. Now, when Mitt Romney became the nominee, and even before he became the nominee, our message against then Governor Romney very conveniently fit our economic frame. And I think what they've got to do is not just talk about what they've done, which is tremendously important. They've got to burn those accomplishments in, but they've also got to really put this contrast in front of people. What is Trump going to do economically? Whose taxes is he really going to cut? You know, what didn't he do about prescription drug costs? All of those things have to get laid out in front of voters so that they begin to make a choice and a comparison in a way that, quite frankly, a poll a year out is just harder to do.
Well, let's talk about Republican voters and how a whole bunch of them responded to former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie over the weekend, speaking in Florida.
Yeah. Well, now it feels like home. Thank you all very much. What a shock you're for Trump. I'm going to fall over dead. Every one of those boos, every one of those catcalls, every one of those yells will not keep it. Yes, sure. Will not solve one problem we face in this country. Your anger against the truth is reprehensible.
Mark, you actually have some sadness in your eyes looking at that.
I do, just because the bottom line on all this is that, yeah, it's a lot about Trump, but at the end of the day, it's what Christie said. It's about the truth, and the Republican Party has become anti-truth. So Chris Christie, Asa Hutchinson, same thing when he went up there, when he was just telling the truth. They're getting booed for telling the truth. And so, you know, I think the Republican Party has just clawed its way to the bottom. And when you can't tell the truth, look what you're left with.